All right, guys, it's week 19. Let's get started with revolutions. We only have one chapter this week to make it easier to get back into the groove of things. So let's start with popular sovereignty. Now, popular sovereignty is in direct reaction to what was medieval and ancient notions of mandate of heaven, divine right of kings, and it's about making kings accountable to the population in which they serve. All of this was influenced directly by Enlightenment ideas. John Locke specifically is going to be the most influential. He believes that rulers derive power from the consent of the ruled. So in a sense, rulers are only put into place by the people in which they serve. So that changes the way kings and rulers see their position. They're not given that right by God. They are empowered by their people, which changes the way government is looked at. Now, individual freedoms are going to be created and are going to be the foundation of the Enlightenment ideas. Voltaire, he is going to be all about freedom of speech. Rousseau, he believes in equality for individuals regardless of class. This, of course, is not for women because that would just be crazy. He writes The Social Contract, which argues that society is collectively the sovereign. So as a whole, it's what the whole of the population wants, not what the individual. Now, the first major revolution during this revolution period is the American Revolution. Now, the American Revolution did not start off as, hey, we're going to revolt against England and we're going to fight back as much as we possibly can. That was not the case at all. It kind of happened slowly and kind of organically to a degree until people realized they've gone too far. They can't just be friends with England. So the 13 colonies originally regard themselves as British citizens all the way up until almost 1776. And then at that point they realized, hey, we cannot go back on this. So we're going to have to go all the way, and that means revolting and leaving the British colonies forever. So that's how the revolution starts. Now, the reason why the revolution came about was because of the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War was the English defending the western territory of America, which we would call like Ohio, Missouri, all those new now states, territories, from the French and the Indians. Now, around the world, it's known as the 7 Years' War. Here in the United States, it's known as the French and Indian War. It's a very expensive war for the British because they're fighting it not only here in America, but they're also fighting it over in the Indian Ocean. After the French and Indian War, they have to increase taxes significantly on the colonists to help defend it. Now, the British felt like it was fair of them to do that because they're essentially protecting the colonists. The colonists see it as unfair because they have no representation in Parliament because they're colonists and not citizens, although the colonists identified themselves as citizens. So we're going to have a lot of problems with that. Now, because of the French and Indian War and the massive cost it took for the British to win, they are going to increase taxes on the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Quartering Act, and the Tea Act. All of these are going to be increased, and they are going to be used to help pay for the French and Indian War. Now, the colonists, like I said, do not agree with being taxed without representation in Parliament, so what they do is they start boycotting British goods because they feel like their voices aren't being heard. Now, one of the largest protests is going to be the Boston Tea Party in 1773, where some rowdy colonists in Boston are going to throw tea out into the harbor to protest the Tea Act. We're also going to have the Continental Congress starting to be developed in 1774, a year after the Boston Tea Party. And eventually this Continental Congress is going to send a Declaration of Independence, or the greatest breakup letter ever, to England, declaring their independence and no longer British citizens, and this will be the start of the war. Now, directly influencing the beginning of the United States of America and even the shape of the government is going to be John Locke and the individual rights and sovereign based on the consent of the ruled. Now, as soon as the Declaration of Independence was sent, and even beforehand, truly, we had the 13 colonies divided into patriots and loyalists. Patriots were those followers and believers in the American cause, while the loyalists, also known as Tories, were loyal to the king and the crown above all. Now, only about 20% of the white population were loyal to the British monarchy. The Quakers, which are a religion that was pretty popular here in the United States at the time, are going to be completely neutral, while the African American population, the slave population, is going to be split. Both sides saying, hey, if you fight for us, we'll give you freedom. So they had a very unique choice. Do you stick with the British or do you stick with the English and you get freedom theoretically? And the Native Americans. Some of them were tied to the Americans were promised, hey, if you fight for us, we will, give you more independence and we won't be taking so many land. Both sides said the same thing, so they had to choose. Now, during the Revolutionary War, some of the things that made the colonies very strong is they had the logistic advantage. They didn't have to send troops that far, like on ships for a month and a half, in order to fight the war. They had very popular support. About 80%, 75 to 80% of the population supported the war. And there was support of British rivals, like the French, for instance, are huge supporters of the American Revolution, or a huge part of the reason why we won, actually. And George Washington is an incredible military thinker and imaginative military leadership, which inspires and allows the Americans to win. But when we think of all the great things about the American side, it's hard to overlook what happened with the British. Now, the British have a very strong central government that has been very powerful for a very long time and very, very effective. They have an army and a navy. Now, keep in mind, during the Revolution, John Adams actually starts the U.S. Navy in the middle of the Revolution. Not so great. That's why the French are such a huge ally for the Americans, because we had like 5 ships to our Navy, and only 2 of them were built to be in the Navy. The rest of them were like fishing ships. That's why the French allies are going to be able to be such a huge asset, because it's mostly their Navy we needed, and the Loyalist population. We're going to have a lot of British spies spying on these Americans, trying to get information and disperse it back to England. Now, the American Revolution is going to take up most of the East Coast. We're going to see that it is going to be a pretty bloody conflict, and is going to have a huge impact, not only on here in the United States, but it's going to have a massive impact on the world as well. Now, what is going to happen is the United States obviously is going to win. We sign the Treaty of Paris in 1783 with the British. That is going to give our independence. And we are going to have a lot of issues. Now, it's not going to be a nice, pretty type. Everyone says that. Well, the Battle of Yorktown was a final decisive victory. Yes, it was a huge surrender, but it doesn't mean the war ended at that moment. That's going to happen in 1781. It's going to lead to the peace treaty, but the peace treaty is actually going to take about 3 years to complete. In 1787, the Constitution of the United States is drafted because the Articles of Confederation is going to fail, and this is going to create a federation system, which means there's going to be a centralized government, which the Articles of Confederation was a state system. And we're going to see political and legal equality for men of property. So if you had property, you were a voter, and if you were white, of course. If you did not have property, you were not a voter. Now, the American Revolution is going to directly influence and start the French Revolution. Now, the French Revolution is going to be revolting against royalty. They're not fighting against the inability to have representation without taxation, because they have no representation in France because it's a monarchy. So the reason why the French are revolting is because of serious fiscal problems in France. We're going to have massive war debts from the French and Indian War, as well as from helping the Americans in the American Revolution. Remember, the French joined the American Revolution because they just wanted to piss off the British. So it was a very expensive way to piss off the British, but highly successful because they helped the Americans win. 25% of tax revenues went to the military, while the people of France are starving, so you can understand why they're upset. All of these problems are going to lead to the revolution that is even more radical and much more severe than the American Revolution. So we're going to see that the Estates General, which is the predecessor or the pre-French Revolution government body. Now, the first estate is going to be made up of the king and the Catholic clergy. It's only about 100,000 people. It's only about 1% of the population. The second estate is made up of about 400,000 people of France, and it's only worth 2% of the population. The third estate is everyone else, and that makes up 97% of the population. So it's your peasants, your urban residents, your bourgeoisie, or your middle class. Now, the States General is going to be founded in 1303. It is the legislative body, but each estate only has one vote. So there's only three votes being casted. Now, the first and second estate has 2 votes, but only represent 3% of the population, while 97% of the population only has 1 vote. As I think you can clearly agree that the first and second estate are always going to agree on whatever's better for them, while the third estate is always going to be kind of left out in the cold, which we're going to see is going to happen. In 1789, we're going to see Louis is going to call the Estates General for new taxes in May of 1789 in order to pass new taxes in order to pay for what is the remaining debt of the French and Indian War and to afford supporting the American Revolution. The Third Estate demands greater social change. They won't vote for anything until they get better social change and more influence over the Estates General because, like I said, 97% of the population only get 1 vote. So June 3rd, the Third Estate secedes, and they rename themselves the National Assembly. The National Assembly is what the French legislative body is still called today, even though it has gone through many changes from what it originally was. In June, we have the Third Estate secede from the group and start their own National Assembly. In July, we're going to have a massive mob of the bourgeoisie attack the Bastille, or the middle class you're going to attack. And if you've ever seen Les Mis, this is what they're doing. It's the Bastille. Now, the National Assembly is going to write in August of 1789 the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. It is going to be based off the American Declaration of Independence. It is going to be focused on the equality of men. Women were not included. We're going to see that they are going to try to readdress this in 1791. Eventually, women in France do get the right to vote. Pretty within 10 years of men getting the right to vote. However, Napoleon, who we'll see here in a few minutes, is going to take that back. So women in France are voting, then they're not voting. They're not voting, then they're voting, then they're not voting. A little tricky. Declaration of Rights of Man is going to ensure that every white man is going to have the ability to vote and have individual rights protected by law. Now, the radicalization of the revolution, the reason why it's much more radical than the American Revolution is because one of their big mantras is liberty, equality, fraternity, that to be of French descent, to be a part of the revolution is worthy of your life. In the American Revolution, remember the motto was no taxation without representation. So it's more of a government thing than life or death. So keep in mind that makes it a lot more extreme. The National Assembly abolishes the old social order, so nothing about the previous social order. So if you're a lord, noble, anything like that, you are no longer in power, which means you are probably going to be executed for your crimes against the bourgeoisie and the Third Estate. They're going to seize church land and redefine the clergy as citizens. So there's no such thing as a state in our radical France. The new constitution does have a king, but subject to legislative authority. That's going to pass pretty quickly because they don't really know how to do that, so it's going to fail pretty quick. Convention, they elected by universal male suffrage. So we're going to see that the National Assembly is going to be made up of all men. And we're going to have conscription for war. So you had to all be signed up and fight for the France. Remember, this is all about liberty, equality, fraternity, which means France above all. Now, in 1793, King Louis and Queen Marie Antoinette are found guilty of treason, and they are sent to the guillotine, and they will be executed and killed for their crimes against the French. This is the beginning of what we call the Reign of Terror, which is brought in by Maximilien Robespierre. Now, he is the incorruptible leader of the Committee of Public Safety. Come to find out, he's incredibly corrupt, but that's another story for another day. He is the leader of the Jacobin Party. He's very powerful and becomes the most powerful person in France. He is sending hundreds of thousands, 300,000 people are in prison. He executes 40,000 people for crimes against France, both people before the revolution and after the revolution. He closed churches, priests were forced to marry, and promoted a cult of reason as a secular alternative to Christianity. So it's not like They're just shaping a new government. They're changing everything. They even changed the calendar, for goodness sake. Now, the Directory is a revolutionary enemies of the Jacobians. Robespierre was arrested and sent to the guillotine. So he was killed by the machine he commissioned to make. Anyway, the men of property take power in the form of a directory. So we're going to see that because of the French Revolution, the extreme is going to be Robespierre. And because Robespierre became so extreme in his power surge, that it's going to swing in the other direction, as power always does, and the Directory are going to take over. Now, the Directory is unable to solve economic and military problems in France, so France is in complete chaos, until a gentleman by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte comes into vogue. Now, he was born in Corsica, which is a small island in the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Italy, over by Sardinia. He is an army official under Louis the 14th, and he is a general at the age of 24. He is one of the most brilliant military strategists of history. He's the second most written about person in history, second only to Jesus. He overthrew the Directory in 1799 and dismissed them. He established his own government called the Consulate, and he appointed a three-board system to make the decisions, and he crowned himself emperor in 1802. Now, once Napoleon became Emperor of France, which is the first time an emperor has ever existed, remember, they fight the revolution to have more individual power, and then they have the Directory, they have the Jacobians, and now they have a guy named Napoleon. So Napoleon sets up an agreement with the Pope. He's saying, "Oh, Pope, I'm so sorry for bothering you. You know, I know we've done some terrible things. Please forgive France. I'm really sorry." So the Pope forgives Napoleon and commissions him and says thank you and supports him in being the son of understanding of the importance of Christianity. So he pays salaries to the clergy, and he offers freedom of religion. He doesn't care if you're a Christian. He doesn't care if you're Jewish. He is all about freedom of religion. But he's very much so inspired by Enlightenment ideas in some respects, like freedom of religion, as well as, I totally know this, freedom of religion and individual rights. Now, in 1804, he promulgates the Napoleonic Code, or he releases the Napoleonic Code, which is a patriarchal authority, which Napoleon is a big fan of, and he became the model for many civil codes, which we're going to see are still very heavily influential in Europe still today, including France itself. The Napoleonic Code is very tight control on newspapers. It's only allowed to release the stories that Napoleon and his offices approve, which we're going to see as censorship, and use a secret police. So he is going to be the foundation of what Hitler will later use as the basis of his source of power. Now, Napoleon's empire is going to be one of the largest Europe has ever seen. Now, he conquered the Iberian and the Italian peninsulas, as well as the Netherlands. He's going to force Austria and Prussia to enter an alliance with him, or he threatens to kill them and take over their countries. So they decide to get involved. Now, Napoleon is going to invade Russia because of their exiting of the continental system, as well as opposing Napoleon's strategy. So he invades Russia. Well, the problem is that he leaves France in a summer uniform, and by the time he gets to Russia, it's early September. Well, winter starts early in Russia, and the Russians are using scorched earth policy, and there's no food, there's no shelter. Napoleon's army is going to starve. Now, Napoleon's army is going to get wiped out very quickly. When he gets back to France, he's an embarrassment, and he's going to kill 380,000 soldiers because of his mistake based on his ego, and the people of France then exile him to a small island in the Mediterranean called Elba. Well, he's only on Elba for about 12 months, and he gets bored, and he sneaks back to Europe and goes back into France and reconquers France for himself and declares him emperor for a second time of France. He's only in power for about 100 days the second time around, because eventually he is going to fight in the Battle of Waterloo on day 100, which is against his arch nemesis, nemesis, Duke Wellington, who is going to defeat him. And once he gets defeated at Waterloo, they send him to St. Helena, and he is going to die in 1821. Now, Napoleon's empire is going to be very expansive and very, very powerful. Keep in mind, he's really only been in power and incredibly influential for about 10 to 15 years. So a small blip on world history's radar, but an important blip nonetheless. Now, with the French Revolution going, all of the French colonies, especially in the Western Hemisphere, including South America, you're going to see that people are now starting to get interested in revolting because the American Revolution is going so well. France is busy with the French Revolution, this Napoleon guy taking over. So Haiti, which is a French colony, is going to revolt. Now, they're going to be the only successful slave revolt. The island of Hispaniola, the Spanish colony of Saint-Domingue is on the east side, while the French colony of Saint-Domingue, or however you want to say it, is on the west side, which is now called Haiti. It's Dominican Republic's on one side today, and Haiti's on the other side for all of you who've ever traveled to the Dominican Republic. We're talking about the island, but on the other side. Rich Caribbean colony for its sugar plantation, coffee, and cotton, of course. And almost 1/3 of France's foreign trade is coming from this island. So it is a very important island, but they are going to rebel. Now, the society in Saint-Domingue, which is the French side, which is what we call Haiti, 40,000 white French settlers live there, and they have a domesticated settler structure, with a dominated social structure, which the white people are in power and the black slaves and freemen and all of these brown people, locals, are going to be much, much lower. Now, 28,000 free people of color or mixed races or freed slaves are going to have just small holders of plots, and 500,000 slaves are going to revolt. Now, there's a high mortality rate. A lot of people are going to die. Many are going to flee into the mountains, and a lot of the free slaves are going to be involved as well. Now, the revolt is going to be led by Louverture, and they're going to have Toussaint, who's also going to be in Toussaint is his given name, but he eventually changed his name to Louverture. Now, because of the inspiration of the American and the French Revolution, he gets people to fight the French. Now, in 1789, the white settlers demand self-rule, but with no equality for the people of color. So white people are now declared themselves free from France. They don't have to pay all the taxes, but the colored people are not. In 1791, the people of color are very upset, so they decide to start fighting back. Now, the slaves revolt under the voodoo priest named Buchanan. The French, the British, and the Spanish forces attempt to intervene. Now, remember, this is a very powerful island because it has so much mass wealth. Now, Toussaint, or future renamed Louverture, or the opening in 1791, comes into power. He is a descendant of a slave, but he is a freed man. He helped his original owners escape and then join the rebel forces. So he was friendly-ish to his former slave owners. However, he is a free slave of the state. He built an army of 20,000, and they eventually take over Saint-Domingue. 1801, they're going to promulgate a constitution of equality, making all people on that half of the island to be equal. In 1802, arrested by Napoleon's forces, and he's going to die in a jail in France. Now, the French troop division drive out in 1804. Haiti forces eventually win. So Napoleon is going to go and get him and capture him, bring him back to France to prosecute him for his crimes. However, Haiti is still going to eventually become a free. Now, after the Haitian revolt, this is going to inspire the Latin American society to start fighting back. Now, 30,000 peninsulars or colonial officers from the Iberian Peninsula are going to be intrigued. 3.5 million Creoles born of Spanish or Portuguese descent are going to have grievances with these white people from Spain. In 1810 to 1825, we're going to see a movement of Creole-dominated republics. So they're tired of the white people coming in and being in charge. They want it to be more of an equal system. Eventually, 10 million others, African slave mixed-race populations, are going to get involved. The first Latin revolution to be successful is the Mexican Revolution. Now, Napoleon's invasion of Spain and Portugal are going to weaken the royal authorities over in the Americas. So Napoleon is a bad thing for Europe, a great thing for the Americas, because as soon as Napoleon starts conquering all these European colonial powers, all their colonies were like, well, hell, if they're distracted, let's declare our independence. Now, Hidalgo is going to be the big leader of the French Revolution, the Mexican Revolution, and he is going to lead revolt. Hidalgo is going to be captured and executed, but the rebellion is going to continue without him. Eventually, we're going to have Agustin de Iturbide, and he's going to declare independence in 1821 from Mexico, and he installs himself as emperor. He's going to be removed less than 2 years later, and a republic's going to be installed. So, southern regions are going to form a federation, then divide into Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica. So all of these territories south were declaring themselves as a federation, but are eventually going to be divided into individual countries. Now, Simón Bolívar, he is going to lead the independent movements in South America. Now, he's a big name. It's important that you know because AP World loves him. Native of Caracas or Venezuela, which is influenced by the Enlightenment and George Washington directly. He's going to rebel against the Spanish in 1811. This is going to get caught up in all the Latin revolutions, and he's going to be forced into hiding because he is the most wanted man of the Spanish Empire. He's eventually going to form alliances with many Creole leaders from other areas, San Jose Martin and Bernardo Higgins. They're all going to work together in order to figure out a way to better ensure that they are protected or isolated from too much of an invasion. Eventually, the Spanish rule is going to be destroyed in the Americas by 1825. Now, after 1825, we're going to see the creation of the Gran Colombia. Now, Bolívar hoped to start a U.S.-style federation where we have independent states that come together in a federal system and create the United States of America. That's what he wanted. He wanted Venezuela, Cuba, Ecuador to form the Gran Colombian. He attempts it, but it's going to fail. The reason is because of strong political differences, and the Gran Colombia is going to completely disintegrate. The dream fails. He goes into a self-imposed exile and dies of tuberculosis. So we're going to see that essentially this is going to be a thing that he never really recovers from, even though he ensures independence for his country. Now, the Brazilian independence movement is going to be one of the last places to be affected by the revolutions. Now, Napoleon's invasion sends Portuguese royal court to exile in Rio de Janeiro. In 1821, the king returns. Son Pedro left behind as the regent. So we're going to see that the Brazilian power, because of Napoleon's invasion, is going to be sent to Brazil, which is going to delay the revolutions, which is why they're the last of the major countries in South America to revolt. Pedro negotiates with the Creoles, declares independence of Brazil. He becomes Emperor Pedro the First, and he is going to keep the social structure remainly intact. So the lighter skinned people are going to be in power, while the darker skins are going to be lower, just how the Spanish kept it before, Portuguese kept it before in Brazil. Now, the emergence of ideologies. We're going to have a major focus on two major types, which is conservationism and liberalism. Now, we talk about ideologies. Edmund Burke of England is going to start the conservative one. He disavowed rapid revolutionary change. He believed that change should be slow, methodical, and thought out, which is a very conservative idea, as well as a slow evolution of society. Things should slowly change, not all at once. Now, the liberalism viewed conservatives as defenders of illegitimate status quo, or fans of kings and queens and monarchy style, things that keep the poor citizens in the shackles of oppressive society. Now, liberalism is all about manage, not stifle social change. It has to keep it in check, but cannot get out of control. Support it, but not smother it. John Stuart Mill of England is going to be the bigger supporter of this. Now, some of the good things that do come out of all these revolutions is going to be the end of the slave trade. Now, the campaign to end slavery begins in the 18th century. We're going to see that it's going to gain momentum in America, French, and Haitian revolutions. Obviously, all these places are directly involved in the triangular trade with the African civilizations. William Wilberforce, he is a philanthropist, and he succeeds in having Parliament outlaw slave trade in 1807. Britain is the largest slave trader at this point. Previously, it was the Dutch. Now it's England at this point, with them outlawing slave exportation from Africa and slave trade. Eventually, most of it kind of dies out. Now, keep in mind, slavery is still legal. If you own slaves, you can have it. You just can't buy anymore here in America, France, or in British colonies. Now, other states are going to follow suit, but illegal trade continues until 1967. So it doesn't solve the problem, it starts dealing with it. Now, Haiti ends slavery with revolution. After the Haitian Revolution, led by Toussaint, we're going to see, or Louverture, you're going to see that slavery ends. Mexico is going to abolish slavery in 1829 and stops the U.S. development of slave-based cotton industry in Mexico. So we had a lot of Americans go into Mexico and start slave-based cotton fields. Those have also stopped as well. By 1833, the British abolished slavery, offers compensation for former owners. So if you are a slave owner, we're going to pay you for your slaves. Your slaves are free, and we're giving you compensation. Other states are going to follow, but offer freedom without equality. If you are a former slave, you are not going to be equal. You will instead be limited to a secondary class citizen. You're not a slave, you're not property anymore, but you're definitely not a citizen. Property requirements, literary tests, and blocking the vote. Now, United States is going to fall in this category. They're going to offer freedom without equality, but that's not going to happen until after the American Civil War. Now, Enlightenment ideals in women. Women during this whole process are pretty much neglected, even though before revolutions, women, in the midst of revolutions, women were getting the right to vote, but by the end, most women were not voting. Enlightenment thinkers remain conservative regarding women's rights. Rousseau, who is a huge Enlightenment thinker, believed women should receive education and prepare for lives as wives and mothers. That essentially all women need to do is learn how to cook and clean and sew, and we should have formalized education to make sure we're all very successful at our future jobs of being wives. Now, Mary Estelle argues that women are essentially born into slavery and that we, in fact, have no opportunity to improve upon our lives. She's a huge feminist and a huge abolitionist and for the eradication of slavery, and eventually will become a suffragette or a massively powerful suffragette who is going to allow British and be a part of the first time women in England get to vote, which is pretty cool. Mary Wollstonecraft is going to write the Vindication of Women's Rights here, and she's going to be a huge American influence as well. Now, what was going on with women in the American and all revolutions? Women are active in all phases of the French Revolution. If it wasn't for women in the French Revolution wouldn't have occurred. Women are going to storm Versailles in 1789, demand for food. Republican Revolutionary Women Party are going to patrol the streets of Paris with firearms. They are a huge component, but as soon as men get the equality of voting, they forget who helped them, and that's the women. So women are in a huge push to get these rights, but by the time that they get to the final of signing the papers, men always forget, what? We need to protect the women. They don't need to vote. Women are going to play massive roles, but they're going to hold very few positions of authority. The revolutions do grant equality in education, property, and legalized divorce. So we have no rights in our government, but we can get a divorce, so that's exciting. And we're also having some sort of equalized education to a degree. Women are not allowed to vote, and major task of 19th century. Elizabeth Cady Stanton here in the United States is going to be a huge proponent of that. Now, nations and nationalism. After the French Revolution, after the revolutions, people are now identifying themselves as nationalist, as in I'm an American, I'm a French, I'm a Mexican, rather than talking about your religion, which is what people typically identify themselves. Now, they're no longer identifying themselves as a clan, religious, or regional territories. They're declaring themselves as national identities. Now, this is unusual based on shared language, usually based on shared languages, customs, values, historic experience is where we're going to see that. Now, the idea of a nation has immediate relationship with political boundaries. The people of France knew where the boundaries of France were, and the people inside were French. Now, the types of nationalism is going to be cultural nationalism, which praises the people. We're going to have literature or folklore, which is going to be the spirit of the people. We also have political nationalism, which is very, very powerful and easier to identify, to be quite honest, which is the movement of political independence of a nation from other authorities. So the unification of national lands. Most people are going to identify themselves as Americans after the American Revolution rather than before, because the fact that all of the federalization of the constitutional specifically. Now, nationalism and anti-Semitism. The rise of nationalism is going to increase the rise of anti-Semitism. Nationalist ideologies are distrustful of indigenous minorities. So these minority groups they feel are a massive threat to their new cohesiveness. Now, pogroms, violent attacks on Jewish communities in the Russian Empire are going to start really beginning in 1881. So the idea of blaming Jews, hating Jews, and all that stuff isn't something that's unique to what we know is going to happen in World War II. It is actually something that starts under this whole revolutionary component. Anti-Semitism is a rallying cry for many European nationalists of eradicating the problem. French military is famed for selling military secrets to Germany. Eventually exonerated. The great debate of loyal Jews in European societies is going to be a massive problem, which will really not be fixed until the 20th century or addressed after major problems of the Holocaust. Now, Zionism. Now, with all this anti-Semitism, there is a backlash or a backswing, and that is Jews, specifically Theodor Herzl from Austria. He is going to see a huge mob of anti-Semitists, and he's going to conclude that the Jews need someplace to go, and he wants to reestablish the Jewish state of Palestine. Now, the Zion symbol is synonymous with Jerusalem. So he believes that the only way that we can ensure that the Jewish people are safe is to pull them all out from Europe and create Palestine. Now, this is the foundation of the ideology around creating the state of Jerusalem after World War II, after all the atrocities of the Holocaust, just kind of connecting that for you. After Napoleon, especially in Europe, is kicked out and sent to St. Helena to die, the Congress of Vienna meet and try to figure out how we can dismantle Napoleon's empire and how we can establish a balance of power. They also want to employ all the monarchies they possibly can because they're a very conservative idea. And they're also trying to suppress this idea of nationalism because they want people to not be so divided, but instead of unified under monarchies. It's going to fail, but they try to do it. Now, nationalist rebellions are going to be a huge big thing. The Greeks in the Balkan Peninsula seek independence from the Ottoman Turks. So no longer do we want to be part of empires, we want to be a part of our own countries. So the Ottoman Empire starts falling to pieces and losing parts because the Balkans want to be part of their own country. We have Hungary wants to be a part of their own country. We have Greece wants to be. Now, the rebellions are all over Europe are erupting. The idea of Napoleon coming in and conquering and defeating all these monasteries, people are seeing that you don't have to have a born leader who was built into a family of powerful leaders to lead a country. It can be just a small, normal kid from Corsica can do this. So we're going to see a lot of rebellions. Some of the big things that are going to that are going to be starting, which are going to cause huge problems, specifically World War I and World War II, are going to be the unifications of Italy and Germany. Beforehand, Italy and Germany were small little states that they called themselves German, but they identified themselves as a German state and then German. So they identified themselves into little city-states. Now we are going to see the unification of these territories. Germany, over 300 semi-autonomous jurisdictions are going to be unified for the first time. This makes 300 pretty much independent areas are now going to be unified into a 300-strong center, which is why Germany becomes quite the powerhouse and is going to start World War I and eventually World War II. Nationalist sentiment, it develops ideas of unification. So unifying everyone who would identify themselves as German into one collective group is what the goal becomes. It's about unifying everyone who identifies nationalist or nationalism. Now, Count Camillo di Cavour and Giuseppe Garibaldi are going to unify Italy. And for the first time in history, and essentially finally in 1882. Now, the unification of Germany is going to be done by Otto von Bismarck. Now, Bismarck is going to lead us into World War I eventually here shortly, and Wilhelm I is going to eventually declare the war. Otto von Bismarck is going to unify all of the German territories, which is a pretty impressive military accomplishment on its own. He calls himself the Second Reich in 1871. He believes that the Holy Roman Empire is the first. This is why Hitler calls himself the Third Reich. If you've probably heard that expression, you probably didn't know why. Is because Otto von Bismarck saw himself as the Second Reich, or the second reign, while the Holy Roman Empire was the first reign of truly powerful leaders. Just trying to make that connection for you. Wilhelm I was named emperor after Otto von Bismarck. A lot of drama there. And Wilhelm I will be the gentleman of the German military who is going to declare World War I. So we have the unification of Italy and Germany, and this will conclude our revolutionary stand. So we are set and building up towards World War I, which is pretty exciting. Anyway, have a great week, and I hope you enjoy kind of the breather of last week, and this week's only doing one chapter. Have a great night, and I'll talk to you guys in the class.